I'm Emma, 26, and last Saturday at my mother's 55th birthday dinner, my father stood up in front of our entire extended family, pointed directly at me, and declared, "She's no longer family." The words hit like a physical blow, silencing the restaurant as every relative turned to stare. What Dad didn't know was that I had discovered the real reason behind my lifelong exclusion from family photos, the whispered conversations that stopped when I entered rooms, and the inheritance documents hidden in his office safe. The secret they'd kept for 26 years was about to destroy everything they thought they knew about blood, loyalty, and the daughter they'd tried so hard to erase. But their cruelest betrayal was nothing compared to the revenge that was already in motion. You're probably wondering what could possibly justify such a public disowning, or maybe you're already suspecting there's more to this family drama than meets the eye. Before I tell you how this devastating moment unfolded and the shocking truth that led to their ultimate downfall, I want to hear your theories. What do you think was the dark family secret that changed everything? Drop your guesses in the comments. Smash that like button if you've ever felt like an outsider in your own family, and don't forget to subscribe, because this story of family betrayal and sweet justice will leave you questioning everything you thought you knew about unconditional parental love. Trust me, you won't see the ending coming. From my earliest memories, I knew I was different. Not in any obvious way that outsiders could see, but in the subtle, persistent ways that only a child living it could feel. While my older brother Marcus got bear hugs and proud smiles, my achievements were met with polite nods. While my younger sister Lily was showered with affection and encouragement, my struggles were met with impatient sighs and suggestions that I try harder. The differences weren't dramatic enough to be called abuse. They were more insidious than that. Dad would spend hours teaching Marcus to throw a baseball, but when I asked to join, he'd claim he was too tired. Mom would braid Lily's hair while telling her how beautiful she was, but when I asked for the same treatment, she'd say my hair was too difficult to work with. When report cards came home, Marcus's B's were celebrated with dinner out, while my A's earned a cursory "good job" before the conversation moved to more interesting topics. Family photos were perhaps the most telling evidence of my status. I had a collection of school pictures showing me with missing front teeth, awkward adolescent phases, and genuine smiles, but when I looked at our family albums, I noticed a disturbing pattern. In group shots, I was consistently positioned at the edges, often partially cut off or hidden behind someone else. In candid family moments, I was frequently absent altogether, as if the photographer had carefully framed me out of the happy memories. The exclusion extended to family traditions and inside jokes. Marcus and Lily shared a secret language of references and memories that I was never quite part of. They'd burst into laughter over incidents I couldn't remember, finish each other's sentences about family trips that felt hazy in my own memory, and exchange knowing looks when certain relatives' names came up. When I'd ask what was so funny, they'd claim it was nothing or you had to be there, even though I was pretty sure I had been there. Extended family gatherings were exercises in subtle alienation. Aunts and uncles would make a big fuss over Marcus's latest achievement or Lily's newest hobby, but their interactions with me felt forced and uncomfortable. Grandmother Helen, Dad's mother, was particularly cold toward me, often forgetting to include me in gift-giving or family announcements. When I was 13 and won a statewide science fair, she congratulated Marcus on his participation in JV football the same week, completely ignoring my achievement. The emotional neglect was so normalized that I spent years thinking I was the problem. Maybe I wasn't lovable enough, interesting enough, or worthy of the same attention my siblings received naturally. I threw myself into academics, hoping that perfect grades would earn me the pride and affection I craved. I volunteered for every household chore, thinking that being helpful would make them appreciate me more. I bent over backward to be the perfect daughter, never realizing that the game was rigged from the start. School became my refuge. Teachers appreciated my work ethic and intelligence. Friends enjoyed my loyalty and humor. In those environments, I felt normal, valued, even special. But every day I had to return home to a family where I felt like an unwelcome guest who had overstayed her welcome. The breaking point of my childhood came when I was 16. I had been accepted to a prestigious summer program for gifted students, a full scholarship that would have looked amazing on college applications. I was thrilled, imagining how proud my parents would be, how this might finally be the achievement that earned me equal status with my siblings. Instead, Mom barely looked up from her magazine when I showed her the acceptance letter. "That's nice, honey, but we can't afford the travel costs," she said dismissively. The program was in a city just 2 hours away, and the transportation costs would have been minimal compared to what they regularly spent on Marcus's sports equipment or Lily's dance classes. "But Mom, it's a full scholarship. It would help with college applications." "Emma, we've talked about this. College is expensive, and we need to be realistic about what we can afford. Maybe you should consider community college first, see how you do there." Meanwhile, Marcus was already being taken on visits to expensive private universities, and Lily's college fund was a frequent topic of dinner conversation. The message was clear: my future wasn't worth the same investment as theirs. That night, I lay in bed trying to understand why I felt so disconnected from the people who were supposed to love me most. I made lists of possible explanations. Maybe I reminded them of someone they disliked. Maybe I had done something unforgivable as a small child that I couldn't remember. Maybe I was just inherently less lovable than Marcus and Lily. The truth, I would later discover, was far more complex and devastating than anything my teenage mind could have imagined. But at 16, all I knew was that I was living with strangers who happened to share my last name, and that feeling of not belonging was eating me alive. I started planning my escape then, focusing on grades and scholarships that would get me far away from the family that had never felt like home. What I didn't know was that my very existence represented a threat to their carefully constructed family mythology, and that my growing independence would eventually force them to show their true colors in the most brutal way possible. Getting into Northwestern University with a full academic scholarship felt like my first real victory, not just academically, but emotionally. For the first time in my life, I had achieved something that couldn't be minimized or ignored. When the acceptance letter arrived, I expected some version of parental pride, maybe even the acknowledgement I'd been craving for 18 years. Instead, I walked into a kitchen conversation that stopped abruptly when I appeared. Mom and Dad were whispering intensely over coffee, and the sudden silence when they saw me was deafening. Dad recovered first, forcing a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "How's my college girl doing?" he asked with manufactured cheerfulness. I showed them the scholarship letter, hoping this moment might finally bridge the gap between us. Mom read it with the same expression she used for grocery store flyers, and Dad nodded like I had told him about the weather. "That's very nice, Emma. Northwestern is expensive. Good thing you got that scholarship, because we certainly couldn't afford it otherwise." The casual cruelty of the comment hit me like a slap. Marcus's acceptance to a private university had been celebrated with a family dinner and calls to relatives. My full ride to an equally prestigious school was met with relief that they wouldn't have to pay for it. But it was Lily's reaction that really stung. At 15, she looked genuinely confused by the tension in the room. "Wait, I thought Emma was going to community college? That's what you guys always said." Mom shot her a sharp look. "Plans change, sweetheart. Your sister is very determined." The word determined was delivered with an undertone that made it sound like a character flaw rather than a positive trait. But I was too excited about my escape to dwell on their lukewarm response. In a few months, I'd be surrounded by people who appreciated academic achievement and intellectual curiosity. I'd finally find my tribe. College was everything I had hoped it would be. My professors were brilliant, my classmates were engaging, and for the first time in my life, I felt intellectually challenged and emotionally supported. I threw myself into psychology and sociology courses, fascinated by family dynamics and human behavior patterns. Without realizing it, I was studying my own family, trying to understand the dysfunction I had lived with for 18 years. My relationship with home became increasingly strained during those college years. Phone calls were awkward and brief. When I shared stories about my classes, internships, or new friendships, I was met with polite disinterest. When I asked about family news, I often discovered important events had happened without anyone thinking to include me. The most telling incident occurred during my junior year. I came home for Thanksgiving break to find the living room filled with family photos I had never seen before, professional portraits, candid vacation shots, milestone celebrations. What they all had in common was my absence. It was like looking at the history of a family I didn't belong to, even though I had been living in the same house during most of these moments. When were these taken? I asked Mom, studying a photo of the four of them at what looked like a beach resort. Oh, various times over the years, she said vaguely. We had them professionally printed and framed. Don't they look nice? But I'm not in any of them. Well, you were always so busy with your own activities. It was hard to coordinate everyone's schedules. The lie was so blatant it took my breath away. I hadn't been busy with activities. I had been excluded from family trips and outings, told they were just running errands or wouldn't be gone long. These photos proved that what I had experienced as casual exclusion had been deliberate erasure. That Christmas break, I started paying closer attention to family interactions, approaching them with the analytical skills I developed in my psychology courses. The patterns I observed were deeply disturbing. Marcus and Lily were treated as full family members, with their opinions sought, their preferences considered, and their achievements celebrated. I was treated like a long-term house guest, tolerated but not truly welcomed, included in basic activities, but excluded from meaningful family moments. The gaslighting was subtle but persistent. When I pointed out inconsistencies in their treatment of me versus my siblings, I was told I was being too sensitive or looking for problems that didn't exist. When I mentioned feeling excluded, they'd list basic parental obligations they had fulfilled, feeding me, housing me, providing health care, as evidence of their love and acceptance. But the most unsettling discovery came during winter break of my senior year. I was home alone, working on my senior thesis about family systems and psychological development, when I decided to look for old family documents that might help me trace patterns of behavior. I wasn't snooping with any particular agenda. I just wanted to understand my family's history better. That's when I found Dad's home office safe, partially open with a stack of papers visible inside. My first instinct was to close it and walk away, but one document caught my eye. It had my name on it, along with official-looking letterheads and legal terminology I didn't recognize. My hands shook as I pulled out what appeared to be legal correspondence dating back 26 years. Birth certificates, court documents, correspondence between lawyers, and medical records that made absolutely no sense in the context of the family history I had always been told. The first document I read completely changed my understanding of everything. It was a letter from a law firm dated 3 months after my birth, discussing custody arrangements and biological parent rights and confidentiality agreements. There were references to monthly payments and contact restrictions and disclosure limitations that will remain in effect until the child reaches majority age. I sat on the floor of Dad's office, surrounded by papers that told a story I had never heard before. According to these documents, I wasn't Marcus and Lily's full sister. I wasn't even Dad's biological child. I was the product of an affair Mom had during their marriage, and every aspect of my upbringing had been shaped by the legal and emotional fallout of that betrayal. The monthly payments referenced in the legal documents weren't child support in the traditional sense. They were hush money, payments to keep my biological father from pursuing custody or revealing the truth to the extended family. The contact restrictions explained why I had always felt like an outsider, because legally and emotionally, I was one. But the most devastating discovery was a handwritten note in Mom's writing, clipped to the back of the legal correspondence. David insists on keeping her, but only if we can maintain the family image. No one can know the truth, especially not Emma. If this gets out, it destroys everything we've built. I had spent 21 years thinking there was something inherently wrong with me, that I was somehow less lovable or worthy than my siblings. The truth was that I had been the living reminder of Mom's infidelity and Dad's humiliation, tolerated only because sending me away would have raised questions they weren't prepared to answer. The family photos suddenly made sense. I was excluded because my presence reminded them of the lie they were living. The emotional distance made sense. They couldn't bond with me without confronting the truth of my parentage. The casual cruelty made sense. Every day I existed in their home was a day they had to face the consequences of choices made before I was old enough to understand them. I spent the rest of that winter break pretending everything was normal while processing the most devastating revelation of my life. But I also started planning something else, a way to finally confront the people who had spent my entire life lying to me, and a way to make sure the truth came out on my terms, not theirs. They thought keeping their secret was more important than treating me with basic human dignity. They were about to learn how wrong they were. Returning to Northwestern for my final semester, I could barely concentrate on my coursework. The legal documents I had discovered changed everything, not just my understanding of my family dynamics, but my entire sense of identity. I spent hours in the university library, researching family law, adoption procedures, and the rights of children born from extramarital affairs. What I learned was both illuminating and infuriating. According to Illinois law, Dad had no legal obligation to raise me or provide for me financially. The fact that he had chosen to do so, while maintaining the legal fiction that I was his biological daughter, suggested a complex web of motivations that went beyond simple altruism. I hired a private investigator using money from my campus work-study program. Jennifer Walsh was a former family court social worker who specialized in cases involving contested paternity and family secrets. When I showed her copies of the documents I had photographed, her expression grew increasingly grim. "Emma, this is more complicated than a simple affair and cover-up," she said, spreading the papers across her desk. "These monthly payments, the confidentiality agreements, the custody restrictions, this suggests your biological father was someone with significant financial resources and social standing. Someone whose revelation as your father would have caused scandal for multiple families." Over the following weeks, Jennifer's investigation revealed a story that was even more shocking than I had imagined. My biological father was Robert Hendricks, Dad's former business partner and longtime family friend. The affair had occurred during a period when Mom and Dad were separated, but they had reconciled before my birth and decided to present a united family front to the community. Robert Hendricks was married to Dad's sister, my Aunt Catherine. This meant my biological father was also my uncle by marriage, making the entire situation not just an affair but a devastating betrayal within the extended family. The monthly payments weren't just child support, they were essentially blackmail money, keeping Robert from claiming paternity and destroying 2 marriages simultaneously. The investigation also revealed why my paternal grandmother, Helen, had always been so cold toward me. She knew the truth and resented being forced to treat her son's wife's illegitimate child as her own grandchild. The family gatherings where I felt so excluded weren't just coincidental. They were carefully orchestrated to minimize my interaction with people who knew the secret. But the most devastating discovery was that Lily also knew the truth. Jennifer found evidence that she had been told when she turned 18, as part of what appeared to be a family tradition of bringing the real children into the conspiracy once they reached adulthood. Marcus had been informed when he graduated high school. Both of my siblings had spent years knowing I was their half-sister while participating in the emotional abuse that came with keeping the secret. The financial implications were staggering. Robert Hendricks had been paying $2,500 monthly for 21 years, over $600,000 in total, to maintain the fiction that I was David's daughter. This money had funded family vacations I wasn't invited on, private school tuition for my siblings that I was never offered, and the comfortable lifestyle that had always seemed just slightly out of reach when it came to my needs. Armed with this information, I began planning my response. I wasn't just dealing with parents who had emotionally neglected me. I was dealing with the conspiracy of adults who had built their entire family identity around a lie that required my systematic dehumanization to maintain. I started documenting everything. I recorded phone calls home, saved text messages that showed the casual dismissal I had grown accustomed to, and began building a comprehensive record of the emotional abuse I had endured. I also reached out to family members who might not have been part of the conspiracy, testing their knowledge of family history and genealogy. The responses were telling. When I asked Aunt Margaret, Mom's sister, about family resemblances, she made uncomfortable comments about how I definitely got my looks from somewhere else in the gene pool. When I mentioned to Uncle Paul that I was interested in tracing Dad's family medical history for a genetics class, he stumbled over his words and suggested I ask Mom about her side of the family instead. Even extended family members who weren't explicitly told the truth had been given enough information to understand that I was somehow different, somehow less integral to the family than Marcus and Lily. The conspiracy wasn't just limited to my immediate family. It extended to aunts, uncles, and grandparents who had all agreed to participate in the fiction that I was a full family member, while treating me as anything but. The psychological damage was extensive. I had spent 21 years internalizing the message that I was inherently less lovable, less worthy of attention and affection than my siblings. I had developed anxiety, depression, and a persistent sense of not belonging anywhere that I now understood was the direct result of being raised in a family built on lies. But I also felt something else. Rage. Pure, clarifying rage at the adults who had prioritized their own comfort and social standing over the emotional well-being of a child who had done nothing wrong except exist as evidence of their moral failures. I graduated summa cum laude that spring, but none of my family attended the ceremony. They claimed scheduling conflicts, but I knew the truth. Celebrating my achievements would have required acknowledging me as an equal member of the family, something they had never been prepared to do. Instead of feeling hurt by their absence, I felt liberated. Their refusal to show up was just more evidence for the case I was building against them. Every slight, every exclusion, every moment of casual cruelty was being carefully documented and would soon be used to expose the truth they had worked so hard to hide. That summer, I moved to Chicago and started working at a family law firm, ostensibly as a paralegal but really as preparation for the confrontation I knew was coming. I was learning about family court procedures, custody law, and the legal ramifications of fraud and conspiracy. I also started therapy to process the emotional abuse I had endured. Dr. Sarah Martinez was a specialist in family trauma, and she helped me understand that what I had experienced wasn't just neglect. It was systematic psychological abuse designed to make me complicit in my own erasure. "Emma," she said during one of our sessions, "you've been living with a form of gaslighting so complete and long-term that you've internalized the blame for your own mistreatment. The fact that you survived this and still managed to achieve academically and professionally is remarkable. But I still love them," I admitted. "Even knowing what I know, part of me still wants their approval. That's normal. But love doesn't require you to accept abuse. And approval from people who built their family identity around denying your worth isn't worth having." By the fall, I was ready. I had evidence, legal counsel, professional support, and most importantly, I had a plan that would force them to choose between continuing their lie and acknowledging the truth in the most public, uncomfortable way possible. Mom's 55th birthday was approaching, and for the first time in years, I was planning to attend the family celebration. But this time, I wouldn't be coming as the grateful daughter, hoping for scraps of affection. I'd be coming as someone who knew exactly who she was and exactly what they had done to her. The reckoning was about to begin. Mom's 55th birthday party was being held at Chez Laurent, the upscale French restaurant where the family celebrated all major milestones. It was the same place where Marcus's engagement had been announced, where Lily's high school graduation had been commemorated, and where I had never been the guest of honor for anything. The choice of venue was perfect for what I had planned, public enough to ensure witnesses, formal enough to make a scene memorable, and expensive enough that backing down would mean losing deposits and reservations. I arrived early, wearing a navy dress I had specifically chosen for the occasion. Professional enough to command respect, elegant enough to fit the setting, and conservative enough that no one could later claim my appearance had been inappropriate. I wanted every aspect of this evening to be unimpeachable except for the truth I was about to reveal. The first family members to arrive were Uncle Paul and Aunt Margaret, who greeted me with the same polite but distant warmth they had shown for 26 years. Then came Grandmother Helen, who gave me her usual perfunctory cheek kiss while saving her genuine affection for Marcus and Lily. The pattern was so established that no one even noticed it anymore. It was just the natural order of things. Mom arrived in a flurry of excitement, wearing a dress that probably cost more than my monthly rent and jewelry that sparkled under the restaurant's chandelier lighting. She hugged everyone enthusiastically, but when she reached me, the embrace was brief and felt obligatory. "Emma, honey, you look nice. How's work going?" She asked with the tone people use when they're making conversation, but don't really want to hear the answer. "Work is going very well, actually. I've been learning a lot about family law and confidentiality agreements." The words were innocent enough, but I watched her face carefully for any reaction. There was a brief flicker of something, surprise, maybe concern, but she recovered quickly. "That sounds fascinating. I'm sure it's very challenging work." Dad arrived with Marcus and Lily, and the family dynamic shifted into its familiar pattern. Marcus was immediately drawn into a conversation about his latest promotion at the marketing firm, while Lily was praised for her recent graduate school acceptance. I might as well have been invisible for all the attention they paid to my presence. As we were seated for dinner, I found myself strategically placed at the end of a table. Close enough to be included in group conversations, but far enough from the center of attention to be easily overlooked. It was a seating arrangement I had experienced countless times before, but tonight I saw it for what it really was, a physical manifestation of my status as a family outsider. The dinner conversation flowed, predictably. Mom talked about her upcoming cruise with Dad, Marcus shared stories about his new house, and Lily discussed her plans for law school. When the conversation occasionally turned to me, it was with polite questions that felt more like obligation than genuine interest. "And how are things in Chicago, Emma?" Aunt Margaret asked during the main course. "Really good. I'm actually working on a case involving family secrets and paternity issues. It's fascinating how much damage people can do to children when they prioritize their own reputation over honesty." The table went quiet for just a moment, long enough for me to know that the people who knew the truth understood exactly what I was implying. But the conversation moved on quickly, as it always did when topics got uncomfortable. As dessert was being served, Dad stood up with his wine glass, preparing to make the traditional birthday toast. This was the moment I had been waiting for, the perfect setup for what I was about to reveal. "I'd like to say a few words about my beautiful wife on her special day," Dad began, his voice carrying the warm authority that had always made him the natural center of attention at family gatherings. 55 years ago, the world gained an amazing woman who would become the heart of our family. Sharon has been the perfect wife, the perfect mother, and the perfect example of what it means to put family first, no matter what challenges life brings. He paused for effect, looking around the table at faces that were smiling and nodding in agreement. She's raised 3 wonderful children. Well, 2.5 really, and has always made sure that family loyalty comes before everything else. She's taught us that blood is thicker than water, that families stick together through thick and thin, and that some things are more important than individual desires. The 2.5 comment hit me like a physical blow, but I had expected something like this. Dad's casual cruelty toward me had always been part of his public persona, delivered with enough humor that people could laugh it off as family teasing rather than genuine malice. So here's to Sharon, the woman who has kept our family together and maintained our values no matter what obstacles she's faced. Happy birthday, sweetheart. The table erupted in applause and calls of, "Here, here," but I remained seated, my hands folded calmly in my lap. When the noise died down, I stood up slowly, picking up my own wine glass. "I'd like to add something to that beautiful tribute," I said, my voice clear and steady despite the adrenaline coursing through my veins. Dad looked surprised. I had never interrupted his speeches before, had never asserted myself during family gatherings. Mom looked nervous, perhaps sensing that something was different about my demeanor tonight. "Dad, you talked about family loyalty and blood being thicker than water, and Mom, you've always emphasized the importance of honesty and integrity in raising children. I think it's wonderful that you've maintained those values so consistently over the years." I paused, looking around the table at faces that were beginning to show confusion and concern. Which is why I'm sure you'll understand why I need to share something important with everyone here tonight. Something about the true meaning of family, honesty, and the courage it takes to tell the truth even when it's difficult. The temperature in the room seemed to drop. Mom's face had gone pale, and Dad's expression was shifting from confusion to something that looked like panic. "Emma," Mom said quietly, "maybe this isn't the time or place." "Actually, Mom, I think this is exactly the right time and place. After all, we're here celebrating family, surrounded by people who love us and want the best for us. If we can't be honest with our family, who can we be honest with?" I reached into my purse and pulled out a manila envelope, setting it on the table where everyone could see it. "You see, I've been doing some research into our family history lately, learning about genetics and legal documents and the importance of truth in family relationships. And I've discovered some fascinating information that I think everyone here should know about." The silence at the table was deafening. Even the restaurant noise seemed to fade as everyone focused on what was happening at our table. For 26 years, I've wondered why I felt so different from the rest of the family. Why I was treated differently, excluded from family photos, left out of important conversations. I thought there was something wrong with me, something that made me less worthy of love and acceptance. Dad's face was now red with anger, but he couldn't interrupt without causing an even bigger scene. But it turns out I was right to feel different. I am different. And the reason has nothing to do with my character or my worthiness, and everything to do with the lies that have been the foundation of this family for my entire life. This was it, the moment of truth that would change everything forever. I opened the manila envelope slowly, deliberately, making sure everyone at the table could see the official letterheads and legal seals on the documents inside. The silence was so complete I could hear the soft jazz playing in the restaurant's background and the nervous breathing of my family members. "These are DNA test results," I said, holding up the first document so the table could see the laboratory logo at the top. "Professional, court-admissible DNA analysis comparing my genetic profile to David Mitchell, the man I've called Dad for 26 years. Dad's face had gone from red to ashen. Mom looked like she might faint. Marcus and Lily exchanged glances that confirmed what I had already suspected. They knew exactly what I was about to reveal. The results show zero genetic relationship between David Mitchell and myself. Zero. Which means that either I was switched at birth in the hospital, which would be quite the medical scandal, or someone has been lying about my parentage for my entire life. Aunt Margaret gasped audibly. Uncle Paul dropped his wine glass, sending red wine splashing across the white tablecloth. Grandmother Helen looked confused, but was clearly beginning to understand that something significant was happening. But that's just the first document, I continued, pulling out the next paper. This one is even more interesting. It's a DNA comparison between myself and Robert Hendricks. The mention of Robert's name sent shockwaves around the table. Aunt Catherine, Robert's wife and dad's sister, made a strangled sound in her throat. For those of you who might not remember, Robert Hendricks was Dad's business partner and Aunt Catherine's husband. He was also a regular guest at family dinners, holiday celebrations, and birthday parties. A man I've known my entire life as Uncle Robert. I held up the second DNA report, making sure everyone could see the statistical analysis that proved paternity with 99.97% certainty. According to this scientific analysis, Robert Hendricks is my biological father, which means that for 26 years, I've been calling my father uncle and my uncle dad, while everyone at this table participated in a conspiracy to hide the truth from me. The explosion of shocked voices was immediate and overwhelming. Aunt Catherine was demanding to know how long I had known. Grandmother Helen was asking someone to explain what was happening, and Uncle Paul was staring at Mom with an expression of complete betrayal. But I wasn't finished. I pulled out the next set of documents, the legal papers I had discovered in Dad's safe. These are custody agreements and confidentiality contracts dating back to my birth, I announced, raising my voice above the chaos. Legal documents proving that everyone involved in this situation has known the truth for 26 years. Documents showing that Robert Hendricks has been paying $2,500 monthly to keep this secret, over $600,000 in total, money that funded family vacations, private schools, and luxury items that I was systematically excluded from. Dad finally found his voice, standing up abruptly and pointing at me with shaking fingers. How dare you come into your mother's birthday celebration and air family business like this? How dare you disrespect this family with your accusations and your lies? Lies. I laughed, but there was no humor in the sound. Dad, I'm holding court-admissible scientific evidence and legal contracts signed by you personally. The only lies in this room are the ones you've all been telling for my entire life. You have no right to these documents. You went through private papers. You violated our privacy. I violated your privacy? My voice rose for the first time, months of contained emotion finally breaking through. You violated my right to know my own identity. You violated my right to have a relationship with my biological father. You violated my right to grow up in a family that actually wanted me instead of being forced to tolerate me. Mom finally spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. Emma, please. You don't understand how complicated. I understand perfectly, Mom. I understand that you had an affair with your husband's business partner and brother-in-law. I understand that when you got pregnant, you chose to lie to everyone rather than face the consequences of your actions. And I understand that you decided it was acceptable to emotionally abuse an innocent child for 26 years rather than tell the truth about your mistake. The restaurant had grown quiet around us, other diners sensing the drama unfolding at our table, but not quite able to hear the details. Our server had disappeared, probably warned by management to stay away until the situation resolved itself. But here's what I understand most clearly, I continued, looking directly at each family member in turn. You made me complicit in my own abuse. You convinced me that I deserved to be treated differently, that I was inherently less valuable than Marcus and Lily, that my feelings and needs didn't matter as much as maintaining your comfortable lies. I pulled out the final document, a letter I had written summarizing everything I had discovered and everything I planned to do next. This is a copy of a letter I've sent to Robert Hendricks, informing him that I know he's my biological father and that I'm interested in having a relationship with him. I've also sent copies to every member of our extended family because I believe they have a right to know the truth about family relationships and genetic connections. Aunt Catherine let out a wail of anguish. "You've destroyed my marriage. You've destroyed our family." "I didn't destroy anything," I replied calmly. "I revealed what was already broken. Your marriage was destroyed 27 years ago when your husband had an affair with his brother-in-law's wife. I just stopped participating in the cover-up." Dad slammed his hand on the table, causing the wine glasses to jump. "You selfish, vindictive little..." "Little what, Dad? Little bitch? Little whore? Little reminder of Mom's infidelity and your humiliation?" The words hung in the air like a toxic cloud. I had finally named the dynamic that had shaped my entire childhood. I was the living evidence of their shame, and they had punished me for existing. "Here's what's going to happen next," I said, my voice returning to its earlier calm tone. "I'm going to have a relationship with my biological father if he's willing. I'm going to stop pretending that this dysfunctional arrangement is a normal family. And I'm going to stop accepting emotional abuse from people who never wanted me in their lives in the first place." That's when Dad delivered the words that would become the final nail in the coffin of our relationship. He stood up slowly, his face twisted with rage and humiliation, looked directly at me, and spoke loudly enough for the entire restaurant to hear.
"Fine."
"You want the truth? You're right. You're not my daughter. You never were my daughter. You're the product of your mother's affair and my biggest regret. You're no longer family. You're nothing to me." The silence that followed was absolute. Every conversation in the restaurant had stopped. Servers stood frozen with plates in their hands. Even the background music seemed to pause in shock at the cruelty of his words. But instead of devastation, I felt relief. After 26 years of wondering what I had done wrong, of trying to earn love from people incapable of giving it, I finally had the truth. Not just the biological truth, but the emotional truth. They had never considered me family, and now everyone knew it. I stood up slowly, gathering my documents and my purse with steady hands. When I spoke, my voice carried to every corner of the restaurant. "Thank you, David. After 26 years of wondering what was wrong with me, you've finally given me the clarity I needed. You're absolutely right. I'm not your daughter, and I never want to be again. But unlike you, I know the difference between biology and family. Family doesn't exclude children from photos. Family doesn't emotionally abuse innocent victims of adult mistakes. Family doesn't prioritize their own comfort over a child's well-being." I looked around the table one last time, making eye contact with each person who had participated in my systematic dehumanization. "Marcus, Lily, I'm disappointed that you knew the truth and chose to participate in the abuse rather than support your sister. But I understand that you were protecting the people who actually loved and valued you." I turned to Mom, who was crying silently into her napkin. "Sharon, I hope someday you understand that lies don't protect children. They destroy them. But I'm not a child anymore, and I'm not your problem to manage." Finally, I looked back at Dad, David, the man who had just publicly disowned me at a family celebration. "And David, thank you for finally being honest. You've given me the greatest gift possible, the knowledge that I never have to seek approval from someone who is never capable of giving it." I dropped a $20 bill on the table to cover my portion of the dinner and walked toward the restaurant exit with my head held high. Behind me, I could hear the explosion of voices as the family erupted into arguments, accusations, and desperate attempts to process what had just happened. As I reached the door, I heard Aunt Catherine screaming at Mom about destroying her marriage, Grandmother Helen demanding explanations from everyone, and Dad shouting about ingratitude and betrayal. But their chaos couldn't touch me anymore. I was finally free from the web of lies that had defined my entire life. The week following the birthday dinner was chaos, but for the first time in my life, it was chaos that belonged to other people. My phone rang constantly with calls from family members demanding explanations, apologies, and damage control. I let every single call go to voicemail, creating a fascinating audio record of how different people process the revelation. Marcus left angry messages accusing me of destroying the family for attention. Lily called crying, claiming she had only found out recently and hadn't known how to tell me, a lie that was easily contradicted by the timeline Jennifer had established. Mom left rambling voicemails that alternated between guilt-tripping, "How could you hurt your family like this?" and attempts at manipulation. "We can work this out if you'll just be reasonable." But the most telling messages came from extended family members who hadn't been part of the inner conspiracy. Aunt Margaret called to say she had always suspected something was different and apologized for not speaking up sooner. Uncle Paul left a message expressing outrage at being lied to for decades and asking if I needed any support during this difficult time. The most surprising call came from Grandmother Helen. At 82, she had apparently decided that honesty was more important than family harmony. "Emma, dear, I need you to know that I never agreed with how you were treated," her voicemail began, her voice shaky but determined. "I knew the truth from the beginning, and I watched them exclude you and diminish you year after year. I told your father, David, that it was wrong, that you were an innocent child who deserved better. But he said it was the only way to keep the family together, and I was too much of a coward to stand up to him." She paused, and I could hear her breathing heavily before continuing. "I want you to know that you were always my granddaughter in my heart, regardless of biology. And I'm proud of you for having the courage to tell the truth when none of the adults in your life were willing to do it. If you'll have me, I'd like to be part of your life moving forward, but only if you want that." The message made me cry, not from sadness, but from the overwhelming relief of finally receiving validation from someone who had witnessed my childhood treatment firsthand. Meanwhile, Jennifer's continued investigation had uncovered even more disturbing details about the conspiracy. Robert Hendricks had not only been paying monthly support, but had also established a trust fund for my college education. Money that David and Sharon had diverted to Marcus and Lily's private school tuition and extracurricular activities. The trust fund, which should have contained over $200,000 by the time I graduated high school, had been completely emptied without my knowledge. This financial theft gave me legal standing to pursue not just emotional damages, but actual monetary compensation for the education and opportunities one had been denied. My lawyer was confident we could recover the stolen trust fund money plus interest and punitive damages for fraud. But the most significant development was Robert Hendricks' response to learning that I knew the truth. Instead of the defensive anger I had expected, he sent a letter through his attorney expressing genuine remorse and a desire to establish a relationship with me. "Emma," his letter began, "I want you to know that not a day has passed in the last 26 years that I haven't thought about you and wondered if I was making the right choice by staying away. When your mother and David presented the custody arrangement, they convinced me that my involvement in your life would cause more harm than good, that the scandal would destroy multiple families and hurt you most of all." He went on to explain that he had never stopped caring about me, had followed my academic achievements from a distance, and had always hoped that someday we might have the opportunity to know each other. "I understand if you want nothing to do with me," the letter concluded. "I failed you as a father by choosing the easy path instead of fighting for my right to be part of your life. But if you're willing, I would like the chance to know the remarkable woman you've become and to try to make up for lost time." The letter was everything David's parenting had never been: honest, humble, and focused on my well-being rather than his own comfort. I decided to meet with Robert, but on my terms and with clear boundaries. Our first meeting took place at a neutral location, a coffee shop in downtown Chicago, where we could talk privately but safely. I was nervous, having no idea what to expect from the man who was genetically my father but had been absent from my life by design rather than choice. Robert Hendricks was 58 years old, with graying hair and kind eyes that looked remarkably like my own. When I walked into the coffee shop, he stood up immediately, his face lighting up with recognition and something that looked like wonder. "Emma," he said softly, "you look so much like your grandmother, my mother. She would have loved to know you." The conversation was awkward at first, both of us navigating the strange territory of being strangers who shared DNA and complicated history. But as we talked, I began to understand why the adults in my life had been so determined to keep us apart. Robert was everything David wasn't: emotionally intelligent, genuinely interested in my thoughts and feelings, and willing to acknowledge his mistakes without defensiveness. He told me stories about his side of the family, showed me photos of relatives I had never known I had, and answered every question I asked with complete honesty. "I want you to know," he said during our second meeting, "that leaving you to be raised by David and Sharon wasn't just a mistake, it was cowardice. I convinced myself that I was protecting you from scandal, but the truth is I was protecting myself from facing the consequences of my actions." "What would you have done differently?" I asked. "I would have fought for custody. I would have insisted on being part of your life, regardless of the social consequences. I would have made sure you knew you were wanted and loved from day one, instead of letting you grow up feeling like an unwanted burden." These conversations were healing in ways I hadn't expected. For the first time in my life, I was talking to a parent figure who saw me as an individual rather than a problem to be managed, who was interested in my thoughts and feelings rather than just my compliance with family expectations. Robert also provided context that helped me understand my childhood experiences more clearly. He told me about arguments he'd had with David about my treatment, phone calls where he'd expressed concern about my exclusion from family activities, and legal battles over the trust fund money that David had ultimately won through manipulation and threats. "I should have fought harder," he admitted. "But David convinced me that making waves would hurt you more than help you, and I was too much of a coward to risk it." Meanwhile, the fallout from the birthday dinner revelation continued to ripple through both families. Catherine Hendricks had indeed filed for divorce, citing emotional abuse and betrayal that went far beyond the original affair. The divorce proceedings revealed additional financial improprieties, including money that Robert had intended for my support being diverted to fund David and Sharon's lifestyle. Marcus and Lily were struggling to process their role in the conspiracy and the loss of the sister they had never really allowed themselves to know. Marcus sent a letter through a mutual friend, attempting to apologize and asking if we could rebuild our relationship. Lily made similar overtures, claiming she had been too young to understand what was really happening. But I wasn't ready to forgive them yet. Their participation in my exclusion hadn't been passive. They had actively benefited from the resources that should have been mine, had participated in the emotional abuse by joining in family jokes at my expense, and had chosen to maintain the conspiracy even after they were old enough to understand its cruelty. David and Sharon's marriage, meanwhile, was imploding under the weight of 26 years of lies finally coming to light. Without the shared secret holding them together, they were forced to confront the reality of their relationship, built on betrayal, maintained through deception, and sustained by the systematic abuse of an innocent child. The most satisfying development was watching their social standing in the community crumble. The story of the birthday dinner had spread through their social circles, painting them not as victims of a vindictive daughter, but as adults who had emotionally abused a child to maintain their own comfort. Friends were taking sides, and most were not choosing David and Sharon. As winter turned to spring, I realized that my life had fundamentally changed in the best possible way. I was building a genuine relationship with my biological father, developing connections with relatives who actually wanted to know me, and for the first time in my adult life, making decisions based on what I wanted rather than what would earn approval from people incapable of giving it. The legal proceedings were moving forward successfully, with strong prospects for recovering the stolen trust fund money and additional damages. But more importantly, I had recovered something far more valuable: my sense of self-worth and my understanding that I had never been the problem in our family dynamic. 1 year after the birthday dinner that changed everything, I was sitting in a courtroom watching David Mitchell squirm under oath as my attorney presented evidence of systematic financial fraud spanning 2 decades. The judge, the Honorable Margaret Chin, had made it clear from early proceedings that she took a dim view of adults who would steal from trust funds established for children's education. "Mr. Mitchell," Judge Chin asked, her voice crisp with disapproval, "can you explain to the court why you believed you had the right to redirect funds specifically designated for Emma's college education to pay for private school tuition for your other children?" David's lawyer had advised him to settle out of court, but his pride had prevented him from admitting wrongdoing publicly. Now, facing perjury charges if he lied and financial ruin if he told the truth, he was trapped by his own arrogance. "Your Honor, I was acting in the best interests of the family as a whole." "The family as a whole," Judge Chin interrupted. "Mr. Mitchell, these funds were legally designated for Emma's educational benefit. They were not a family resource for you to redistribute at your discretion. The final judgment was everything my legal team had hoped for and more." David was ordered to pay $347,000 in restitution, the original trust fund amount plus interest and investment returns it would have earned. Additionally, he was liable for punitive damages of $150,000 for fraud and emotional distress, plus my legal fees of $45,000. But the money, while satisfying, wasn't the real victory. The real victory was watching the family's social circle finally understand the full scope of what had been done to me and seeing the consequences play out in real time. Sharon and David's divorce had been finalized 3 months earlier, with Sharon receiving significantly less than she had expected due to the court's findings about the misappropriated trust funds. She had been forced to sell the family home and move into a small apartment, while David was living in a studio rental and working overtime to pay his legal judgments. Marcus had reached out several times over the year, and we had begun the slow process of rebuilding a relationship based on honesty rather than family mythology. He had admitted to feeling guilty about benefiting from resources that should have been mine and was working with a therapist to understand his role in the family dynamic. "I keep thinking about how different things could have been," he told me during one of our coffee meetings. "If we had just told the truth from the beginning, you could have had a relationship with your real father. You could have known that half of the family that actually wanted you around. But then the other half would have had to face consequences for their choices," I replied. "And that was never acceptable to them." Lily had been less successful at taking responsibility for her actions. Her attempts at reconciliation felt more like damage control than genuine remorse, and she seemed more concerned about how the family scandal was affecting her social standing than about the harm that had been done to me. The most meaningful relationship development had been with Robert, my father, in every way that mattered. Over the past year, we had built the kind of parent-child connection I had always craved but never experienced. He was genuinely interested in my work, my thoughts, my dreams for the future. He celebrated my achievements without making them about himself and supported my struggles without trying to fix them for me. "I have a lot of years to make up for," he had told me early in our relationship. "I know I can't change the past, but I want to be the father you deserve to have all along." Robert had also introduced me to his extended family. My aunts, uncles, and cousins who had known of my existence but had been forbidden from contacting me. They welcomed me with warmth and genuine affection, and I finally understood what it felt like to be part of a family that actually wanted me around. The most surprising development had been my relationship with Catherine, Robert's ex-wife. Instead of blaming me for the revelation that destroyed her marriage, she had thanked me for finally forcing the truth into the open. "I spent 26 years knowing my husband had a daughter he wasn't allowed to acknowledge," she told me during an emotional phone call. "I watched you at family gatherings, knowing you were my stepdaughter, but unable to treat you that way because of the lies everyone was maintaining. It was toxic for everyone involved." Catherine had no children of her own, and she had expressed interest in building an aunt-niece relationship with me if I was open to it. The idea of gaining family members instead of just losing them was still surreal to me. Meanwhile, Grandmother Helen had become one of my strongest supporters, finally free to express the affection she had been forced to hide for decades. She had started attending my work events and celebrating my achievements publicly, making it clear to anyone who would listen that she was proud of her granddaughter. "I wasted too many years being a coward," she told me. "I'm not going to waste whatever time I have left." The social consequences for David and Sharon had been more severe than I had anticipated. Their church community had been horrified by the revelation of their treatment of me, and many long-term friendships had ended. David had been asked to step down from the school board when the financial fraud became public knowledge. Sharon had lost her position as a volunteer coordinator at the local hospital when the administration decided her presence would be too distracting, given the circumstances. But perhaps the most poetic justice came in the form of their relationship with Marcus and Lily. Both of my siblings had been forced to confront the reality that their parents were capable of systematic emotional abuse, and it had fundamentally changed their view of the people who had raised them. "I keep wondering what else they lied about," Lily confided during one of our awkward phone conversations. "If they could do that to you, what does it say about their capacity for honesty in other areas?" The ripple effects extended beyond our immediate family. Other relatives had begun questioning long-held family narratives and wondering what other secrets might be hiding beneath the surface of their own relationships. The birthday dinner revelation had become a cautionary tale about the long-term consequences of choosing comfortable lies over difficult truths. As I sit here today, sharing this story with all of you, I'm struck by how much my life has changed in just 2 years. I have a father who genuinely loves and supports me, a broader family network that includes me rather than tolerates me, and most importantly, a clear understanding of my own worth that doesn't depend on other people's approval. The financial settlement allowed me to buy a beautiful condo, pay off my student loans, and establish an emergency fund that gives me security I've never had before. But the emotional healing has been even more valuable. I no longer wake up wondering what I did wrong or how I can earn love from people incapable of giving it. I also started a support group for adults who discovered family secrets or biological parentage later in life. It turns out there are more of us than you might expect. People who spent years feeling like outsiders in their own families only to discover there were biological or legal reasons for that treatment. The hardest part, one group member shared, is realizing that the people who should have protected you were the ones hurting you instead. But the most liberating part, another added, is understanding that it was never about you. You weren't unlovable. You were just born into a situation where the adults prioritized their own comfort over your well-being. These conversations helped me understand that my experience, while extreme, wasn't unique. Many families build their stability on secrets that require certain members to be diminished or erased, and children are often the casualties of adult choices they had no part in making. Looking back, I realized that David did me a favor when he publicly disowned me at that birthday dinner. His cruelty was so obvious, so undeniable, that it freed me from any obligation to continue trying to earn his approval. Sometimes the most painful moments are also the most liberating ones. The question I want to leave you with is this: have you ever found yourself trying to earn love from people who were fundamentally incapable of giving it? Have you ever wondered if the family dynamics you grew up with were normal, or if there might be secrets or lies shaping relationships you thought you understood? And here's the deeper question. When you finally learned the truth about relationships that had confused or hurt you, did it feel like devastation or liberation? Did revealing family secrets destroy your family, or did it reveal that your family was already broken? I'd love to hear your stories about family secrets, hidden parentage, or the moment you realized that dysfunction you thought was normal was actually toxic. Drop your experiences in the comments below. Sometimes sharing these stories helps other people realize they're not alone in dealing with family trauma. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe for more real-life stories about family drama, personal growth, and finding the courage to choose truth over comfort. Share this video with anyone who might need to hear that it's okay to walk away from family members who treat you poorly, regardless of biological relationships. Thank you for listening to my story and for being part of this community, where we can discuss the complex realities of family relationships. Remember that family isn't just about biology. It's about love, respect, and genuine care for each other's well-being. You deserve to be surrounded by people who value you for who you are, not people who tolerate you despite who you are. Don't forget to comment with your own experiences. Like this video if it helped you process your own family dynamics, subscribe for more honest conversations about difficult topics, and share this story with anyone who might benefit from understanding that they're not responsible for other people's lies or emotional limitations. Until next time, remember that the truth might be painful, but it's also the foundation of genuine relationships and authentic happiness. Sometimes the family you choose is more valuable than the family you're born into, and there's nothing wrong with prioritizing your own mental health and emotional well-being over other people's comfort with their lies.